Okay, let's dive right in. If you've been watching the news lately, you know things are feeling pretty chaotic out there. But what if I told you that chaos actually has a structure? Today, we're going to examine our current global instability through a very specific lens, the QC2025CE cycle. Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're breaking things down from the viewpoint of Ramses the Wise. We really love untangling these massive, complicated geopolitical shifts and turning them into clear, understandable insights. And well, that's exactly what this briefing is designed to do. We are bringing you this brand new, quick-hit news brief format to break down the latest events pertaining strictly to the QC 2025 CE cycle, specifically looking at where things stand on July 2nd, 2026. Our goal here is to give you a solid framework so you can understand exactly why the headlines look the way they do today. So, here's our agenda for today. 1. The QC 2025 CE cycle. 2. The Iran ceasefire contradiction. 3. Global supply chain shocks. 4. Russian oil export collapse. And 5. Protecting your personal finances. All right, kicking things off with Section 1. The QC 2025 CE cycle, unpredictability as the norm. Ramesses the Wise makes a really compelling point here. These global headaches we're all seeing, they aren't just random, sudden anomalies. They are actually the expected symptoms of a much deeper historical cycle. The fundamental premise is that the political fallout across the US, the Middle East, and Russia is interconnected, and it's going to worsen overall. We're going to keep seeing disruptions of this exact sort for the foreseeable future. Moving right along to Section 2, the Iran ceasefire contradiction, diplomatic paradoxes. Just listen to how former President Trump recently described the denuclearization process. He noted that meetings are going well and framed it as a ceasefire, but in the exact same breath, he stated, "We hit them very hard for 3 nights, as you know, but we're getting along very well." We're looking at this quote objectively today because it just perfectly captures the highly contradictory nature of current global diplomacy. It really is a wild paradox, isn't it? Try reconciling the concept of a peaceful ceasefire and denuclearization on one hand with the physical reality of striking a nation, quote, very hard for multiple nights on the other. It's a prime example of the unpredictable political fallout that absolutely defines the QC 2025 CE cycle. Which brings us to Section 3, global supply chain shocks, from politics to the wallet. Now, this war in Iran has triggered a totally unexpected shortage of critical materials across the global economy. And one of the biggest surprises? Helium. I know, you're probably just thinking of party balloons, right? But it goes way beyond that. Helium is literally an essential input for manufacturing semiconductors, silicon chips, MRI scanners in hospitals, aerospace tech, and advanced electronics. And here's the kicker. At the exact same time the supply is threatened, demand is just skyrocketing because of the booming artificial intelligence and healthcare sectors. It's honestly like watching a giant line of dominoes fall. Step 1. The conflict in the Middle East escalates. Step 2. Shipping from major global exporters like Qatar, which is right in the middle of this conflict zone, gets disrupted. Step 3. Helium supply plummets right when AI demand is surging. And finally, Step 4. This geopolitical clash halts tech production globally, leading to massive semiconductor delays and higher inflation for every single one of us. But hey, the supply shock doesn't stop at your tech gadgets. We are also facing a massive global fertilizer squeeze. Look at this breakdown. Russia, a top global exporter, restricted their exports of ammonium nitrate. China went ahead and imposed its own new export restrictions, and meanwhile, Europe basically cut their fertilizer production entirely because gas prices were just too high. When global supply gets this tight, farmers literally have to use less fertilizer. That means crop yields drop, less food is produced, and global food prices skyrocket. Everything is connected. Let's pivot to Section 4, Russian oil export collapse, asymmetric warfare. So while the entire world has its eyes glued to Iran, long-range Ukrainian drone strikes have managed to take a staggering 40% of Russia's Western oil export capacity completely offline. That is roughly 2 million barrels per day. We're talking massive fires, total shutdowns, and halted loadings at major Baltic and Black Sea terminals like Ulma, Primakork, and Norvossk. That is 3 main Western export routes disrupted all at once. To really put that into perspective, why is this so devastating for them? Well, oil and gas make up roughly a quarter of all Russian government revenue, and this is a high fixed cost industry. That means the second export volumes fall, profits just collapse incredibly fast. Add in the fact that Russia absolutely has to consume 40 to 50% of its own oil domestically, and you realize they just don't have the flexibility to absorb these kinds of export losses. They are in a massive economic squeeze. And honestly, this brilliantly illustrates how modern asymmetric warfare is just breaking traditional economic models. You've got Ukraine launching cheap drones that cost maybe $4,000 to $5,000 to make, but to shoot them down, Russia has to fire off defense missiles that cost hundreds of thousands of dollars. Economically speaking, a cheap drone is crippling billion-dollar infrastructure, forcing Russia into a massively losing trade every single time they have to defend their airspace. But this cycle always throws a curveball. Because the tensions in the Middle East drove global oil prices up, the US actually temporarily eased restrictions on Russian oil at sea. And this loophole allowed Russia to strike massive deals with India worth $6 to $7 billion. In some cases, they're even selling this oil at a premium higher than Brent crude. But again, because their physical export capacity is so severely damaged, they can't even fully capitalize on these higher prices. Finally, let's wrap up with Section 5. Protecting your personal finances, the Ramses solution. Ramses the Wise makes a very stark point here. The political fallout across the US, the Middle East, and Russia will worsen overall. These disruptive trends, whether it's the shipping routes, the rising energy costs, or the bizarre shortages of critical materials, they aren't easily or immediately reversible. The resulting broad global supply shock feeds directly into higher inflation and slower economic growth. And eventually, that lands right on your wallet. So I want to leave you with this final thought to really chew on. As the QC2025CE cycle continues to disrupt everything from the chips powering AI to the price of food on your table, have you taken the necessary steps to proactively protect your personal wealth? Everyone has to act responsibly here because these forces are just much larger than any single market. Thank you so much for joining me for this brief, and I'll see you in the next explainer.